All her life, she was told this day would come, but she never truly believed it would. That was until, of course, it did. Liz sat in her bedroom, crying into her palms. Her father entered the room. "Lizzy, what's wrong?" he asked. "What do you mean, what's wrong?" she responded. "Tomorrow's the Arid." His father hugged her in comfort. "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll pass." No, you don't get it. I'm scared I'll pass, but my friends won't. What even happens when we cross over?" Her father wiped away her tears. "Look, I know you're scared, but all those things are just in your head. You want to cross over, we all do. And if you don't, well, that's okay. I didn't, and I turned out just fine." As he left the room, Liz thought to herself, "You're wrong." Liz realized she didn't even know what kind of test the Arid even was. So to be sure, she studied every subject in the school system: geometry, biology, physics, and engineering. Reviewing it all gave her a sense of comfort, one that wouldn't last very long. The next day, Liz nervously attended her institution. It was a large blue and silver building with odd proportions. Every building on Vlastata was designed like this. The art was all anyone was talking about. The constant reminder only made her more anxious. Liz started to zone out. Everything felt uncomfortably hot. She felt as though she could pass out and slam her head on the floor. Then, she saw her friends, Todd and Zoe, off in the distance. But she didn't want them to see her like this. Liz tried finding a place where she could be alone. Everywhere she went, there was another reminder of her imminent judgment. Other kids were unfazed, some even excited. All of this made her feel awful, and things were only about to get worse. While trying to avoid everyone, Liz bumped into one of her classmates, Jessica. Well, she said sadistically. "If it isn't my favorite person." "Please, Jess, I want you to leave me alone, just for today," Liz pleaded. "Oh, I know. You're just scared you won't pass the Arid." Liz noticed the people around her starting to stare. "Well, no worries, sister. They only let humans take the Arid." Liz's eyes teared up. She ran away and tried to hide. She couldn't tell what everyone else's expressions were, but it didn't matter. They still saw her. They still knew. She hid under the bleachers and cried some more. It didn't take long for Todd and Zoe to find her. "Lizzy, what's wrong?" Todd asked. "What do you mean, what's wrong? I'm a failure. I'll never pass the Arid." Zoe tried to reassure her friend. "Oh, come on, Lizzy. I'm sure all of us will pass. There's a great endless paradise waiting for us." Liz was somewhat calmed by this. Not because of what was said, but who said it. Right as they exited the bleacher, a blaring alarm went off. Panic and chaos filled the football court. The Arid was beginning. Liz and her friends hurried back inside. While running, Liz bumped into a man. He slowly turned around and looked at her. He was very tall. He wore a white lab coat with black gloves. He was unrealistically handsome, and his face seemed to be frozen in a smile. "Hello, young lady. I don't believe we met." Liz was too stunned to reply. "I am Professor Eugene Harris. I'm here to oversee the Arid. I suggest you get moving." Liz still couldn't move. Liz, we gotta go," Todd said as he tapped her on the shoulder. This snapped her out of her trance, and they continued walking. Liz and her friends sat among their peers. The professor stood at the front of the class. He spoke out. "Over 100 years ago, humanity left Earth and came to Vlastara. And since then, every 16 years, we have held the Arid. A ceremonial tradition in which all teens are tested. 5 of them will be selected to cross over to a paradise. He waved to the professor. Professor Harris is here to oversee this Arid. Now, a lot of you are probably nervous, but there is nothing to worry about. Either you'll begin a new life of hedonism, or you'll continue your current lives, which probably aren't that bad. It's a win-win. His words swelled doubt in Liz's mind. The first stage of the Arid was simple. It was a series of bizarre questions that had to be answered like an ordinary test. All the students sat in the auditorium, filling out answers on a holographic sheet. Liz had trouble focusing with Professor Harris staring at her the whole time. On top of that, the questions made no sense. They asked her about her morning routine and what types of food she liked to eat. What is this? She thought. Why aren't they asking me how to design a warp drive or what chemical activates Promethium-90? Despite all her worries, she answered all the questions honestly. The second stage involved a strange room. The room wasn't big enough for the entire school, so they had to split everyone up into small groups and take turns. Liz and her friends eagerly waited for their turn. She heard the other kids speculating what was happening. What do you think it is? You think it hurts? I don't know. Liz just tried to tune it all out. After a while, everyone left the room. They seemed to be fine. This calmed her for a moment. Now it was her group's turn to enter the room. Everyone lined up and entered. It was dimly lit by a red light. A sizzling sound began to manifest. A red energy grid emerged from the walls. The grid moved up and down, left and right. It didn't burn or hurt, but no one really knew what it was doing. But apparently, it was important to the Arid. Liz and her friends left the room feeling lightheaded. What did they do to us? Zoe asked. I don't know, replied Liz. But I don't like this. She was starting to feel sick. She began stumbling around, trying to leave the room. Professor Harris grabbed her arm. I'm sorry, ma'am. No one is allowed to leave during the Arid. Liz clawed at his hand in a futile attempt to break free. Let go of me! I don't want to be here! Liz felt a wave of exhaustion fall over her. Her eyelids grew heavy and she began to lose balance. She fell to the ground and passed out. The last thing she saw was Professor Harris's smile. Liz's eyes fluttered open. In front of her was a blue hologram with a 3D model of a human skeleton. Next to it was a line that would occasionally spike up in sync to a beeping sound. She looked around the room. The walls swayed like waves, slowly grew smaller. The box shrank and shrank. Liz could feel her bones cracking. The beeping sound grew more frequent and louder. Her body bent out of shape. What's wrong with me? Make it stop! Suddenly, the door flung open. Everything went back to normal. It was Liz's father. Lizzy, you're awake. Dad? How long was I asleep? Lizzy, you've been out for over a week. The results of the Arid are already in. Liz's eyes widened. You passed. The next day, Liz's worst fear had come true. She had passed the Arid, but her friends didn't. Her and all other students were given an hour to say their goodbyes. Liz and her friends reminisced, cried, laughed, but eventually it was time for her to go. As she left, she ran into Jessica once again. Jess, please don't bother me. I'm really not in the mood. Jess replied. No, I just wanted to congratulate you on passing. I didn't. Jess was on the verge of tears. Liz thought, this will be the last time I'll ever see her. Maybe it's time we buried the hatchet. She hugged her enemy and tried to reassure her. It's okay. It's okay. So much more you can do with your life here. Be thankful you won't have to leave anyone behind. Jessica wiped away her tears. I wish I had been kinder to you before. You're a good person. You deserve this. At the center of the city sat a large dome. Liz and the other Arid passers lined up. They were all wearing blue jumpsuits. Liz recognized its interior. It's a giant teleporter. No one ever knew what was inside, since people who failed never saw it, and people who passed never came back to tell anyone. But it oddly made sense. Everyone was sealed inside glass pods. The dome started to spin. It spun around and around. Red and orange lights exploded everywhere, and all of a sudden, it was all black. Liz opened her eyes. She was still in the pod. Its glass surface was cracked. She pushed on the door, and it popped open. The pod had landed in a dark cave. She crawled out and got to her feet. Is this paradise? She thought in horror. Where is everyone? Why am I in a cave? Liz tiptoed through the cavern, trying to find an exit. Everywhere she turned, all she found was more stalactites and shadows. Then she heard something, a call in the distance. It was faint, but alive. She called back. She waited a moment, then heard the call again. Liz followed the echo through the caves, quickly but carefully. As she moved, the call grew louder. It was a male voice, crying for help. Eventually, Liz found the source of the cries. It was a boy she knew. His name was Trevor. He had fallen and stabbed his leg on a stalagmite. Help! It hurts! He cried. Stay calm. I'll get you out of here. Liz got down and grabbed his leg. She slowly tried to lift it off the stalagmite, but every time she moved it, Trevor would scream louder. But then, Liz realized something. Trevor's screams weren't all she could hear. Off in the distance, the sound of faint hisses and clicking. Apparently, Trevor's screams had attracted something. Liz couldn't save him in time. In a moment of panic, she jumped behind a large stalagmite. Hey, what are you doing? No, don't leave me! Please! I don't want to die! The clicks and hisses grew louder and faster. An enormous silhouette entered the area. It had two long pincers, yellow bulgy eyes, and black antennas, with a green exoskeleton. It opened its claw-like mouth, and several green tubes slid from its throat. They began burrowing themselves into Trevor's eyes, ears, and mouth. His body convulsed and thrashed. Liz cupped her mouth and tried not to scream. I killed him, she thought to herself. I just let him die. She waited for the creature to leave after finishing its meal. She slowly tiptoed around the stalagmite. Trevor's body had been reduced to a steaming pile of sludge. I've got to find a way out of here. Liz hastily rushed through the caves. As she ran, she began to notice a bright light in the distance. A way out. She ran faster and faster. The sun burned her eyes as she escaped the cavern. Liz covered her face and stopped for a moment. She slowly looked back up, waiting for her eyes to adjust. She was in the middle of an enormous orange desert. Off in the distance was a blue and silver city under a glass dome. It was her home. This is where everyone went all along. Liz didn't waste time waiting by the cave. She began her journey across the desert. It wasn't a very smart move, but it was better than ending up like Trevor. The hot sun beat down on her skin. Heat built up in her head. Blisters formed on her skin, and her mouth dried out of spit. She walked for hours and hours. Eventually, day turned to night, and the night was as cold as the day was hot. But Liz persisted. As she walked, she contemplated what happened. Did they know this was on the other side? Were they trying to kill me? No, it can't be true. This all had to be one big misunderstanding. I would get back to the city, explain everything, and this would never happen to anyone else again. After hours of walking, The lights of the city became visible. Liz's face lit up with relief. Around the city were several large towers. Spotlights emanated from big white eyes atop the towers. Liz waved her arms around and screamed for help. "I'm right here! Help! Help me!" The spotlights pointed towards her. They were as blinding as the sun. A loud alarm sounded. "What's happening? What are they doing?" Liz scrambled around, trying to escape their sight. An enormous ship emerged from behind one of the towers. Most of it was covered in shadow, but Liz could still see the blue flames emerging from below it. The ship hovered above her and dropped down a gigantic glass cube. The cube landed around her. Liz was encased inside. There was no escape. "Let me out! Please! Please!" She banged on the glass and shrieked for help. A blue energy began building up around the walls of the structure. Liz banged the glass harder. "No!" The energy grew and grew. "Please!" In a flash, it was all gone. Liz was paralyzed. She couldn't even blink. She didn't know how long she was like this, but it seemed like forever. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became hours. Hours became days. Eventually, Liz awoke in a strange white facility. There were other cubes around her, with paralyzed people in them as well. Where am I? Then, a black slide door opened, and Professor Eugene Harris entered. "Well, well, well. I knew there was something off about you, Liz." "Professor Harris? What are you doing? What's going on here?" "Now, calm down, calm down. I'm sure you're confused, but all you need to know is you're not special. You're an anomaly. There's a difference." Liz banged on the glass. "Let me out of here, you bastard!" "I understand your confusion, but everything will be okay. We'll find out what went wrong, fix the system, have you lobotomized, then send you back to the nest where the Seek bugs can finish you off." Liz choked. "Lobotomized? Sent back?